Welcome, everyone, to our session this afternoon, Unlocking the Power of MTSS, Elevating Outcomes in Schools. I am thrilled that you are joining us here today. I see representatives from school districts all across the country. So thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. And we're going to jump right in. Before I introduce myself, I want to start with our session objectives. And I'm going to pause for just a moment to allow you a chance to read those, and then I'll do a bit of highlighting. So as you can see, we're going to begin by talking about those key components of a strong MTSS framework and having the opportunity to have those conversations and look at how are your components within that framework? How is the health of those components, if you will? Then we will go into looking at how MTSS supports equitable access to education and instruction for all of our students. And we'll talk about some of the challenges that school districts are facing in implementation of MTSS. We will then go into reflection on what is currently happening with MTSS implementations and look at some opportunities for growth. I will share with you information, some data from the work that I personally have done through this framework with a school district this year, and we'll share the steps that we took and some of the celebrations that we experienced as we're wrapping up this first year. With that said, I am Dr. Tiffany Layton. I am thrilled to be joining you. And as you can see on the screen, just a bit about my background. I have spent many, many years in public education. Um, the majority of my career has been in working with high needs K-12 schools. And MTSS is a true passion of mine, supporting schools in that implementation so that we truly meet the needs of all of the learners in our building, and we're supporting teachers along the way in this process. I'm going to ask you to think about your current MTSS. So your multi-tiered systems of support, just think about it as a snapshot. And as you're thinking about where your district currently is with the MTSS process, I'm going to ask you to think about three specific things. One, a word to describe MTSS currently at your school, within your district. A second thing, a success that you've seen. And a third thing, a challenge you're facing. So I'm going to pause here for a couple of minutes and allow you time to process, get your thoughts together, and then I'm going to ask you to drop these in chat. I'll be monitoring chat as we go along and just be looking for, some of the similarities and some of those successes and challenges. So I'm going to pause, stop talking, give you time to think. We'll join back together in about 1 minute. Starting to see some things come into chat here. So thank you for sharing. I'm just going to give everybody a little bit more time to process your thoughts. And if you're still typing, please continue to get your thoughts in. I am going to go ahead and start sharing some of the things that we're seeing come in here. Words to describe MTSS. I'm seeing words mentioned here, baseline. Another one coming in saying our system is a little fractured. Another one is saying ours is okay, but it needs some work. And then I've seen a couple of them along the theme of outdated. So going along with that needing work. So whether you're thinking about our MTSS system is working okay, but we know we need to make some upgrades, or you're thinking about we really need a system in place. We're just starting from ground zero. No matter where you are, it's okay. This is a starting point. And we're going to have conversations about what can be done to support you in that process. Now, a couple of other things I asked you to think about were the successes and the challenges. So some successes that I'm seeing you drop in chat. There's more focus on data-informed instruction. Fabulous. We know that using that data to support and to meet our students' needs is invaluable. A second one, more focus on SEL, because we know that MTSS is not just about academics. We must consider behavior and social emotional learning. So kudos to you all for sharing those celebrations and those successes. On the flip side of that, some challenges. So a couple of challenges that I've seen come in here. We're really struggling with implementation of tier 2 and tier 3 at the middle school, high school level. And I'm really glad that you all brought that up because that is something that many districts have reached out to me about. You know, hey, we're on this 50-minute schedule, we're in this block schedule, we are not sure how to find the time for tier 2 and tier 3. And so we can talk more about that as we go along. Another one, getting everyone to do small group during tier 1. And you know, that's been a big misconception, I think, since the inception of MTSS, is that small group instruction is a tier 2 thing. But we know that within tier 1, with our grade level standards and our grade level curriculum, that students are also going to need supports for accessing those standards, for accessing those curricular elements. And so how are we supporting at the grade level tier 1 position before we ever even go into tier 2 and tier 3? So another great thing to bring up there. A third one is resources aligned to tier 2 and tier 3. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because we know that tier 2 and tier 3 can't just be the same thing, slower and louder, right? They have to be additional supports. What are those evidence-based, research-based strategies that we're going to use when we know they need more than just tier 1 instruction? So thank you all for sharing. I hope that this helps you see that your district is not alone, that many districts are facing many of the same challenges that you might be facing, but also that many districts are experiencing some of the same successes that you're experiencing. So let's go ahead and move forward, knowing that our goal for our time together is really to continue to center our thinking around MTSS and to continue to look at those shared experiences and how we can move forward. Why the conversations around multi-tiered systems of support? Here's what we know about the impact of effective MTSS. First of all, it boosts student outcomes. And again, it's not just the conversation about academics. We're thinking whole child. We're talking boosted student outcomes in terms of behavior, in terms of SEL, in terms of attendance, along with the academics. A second thing that an effective MTSS system supports is an increase in collaboration among team members. If we are looking at our data and we're making data-informed decisions and planning data-informed instruction and lessons, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. We have to work together. We have to um, collaborate and have conversations about what are going to be our best next steps. We know that effective MTSS builds consistent practices across schools and systems. And when I talk to you about the specific school that I'm going to share with you from a case study here in just a little bit, that's one of the things that the school really focused on was building the consistent practices across the district. So pre-K 12, what are our consistent practices? And we really spent some time in that district thinking about what does our MTSS handbook look like so that everyone can go back to that handbook and really get guidance and support along with the support that, of course, they're receiving in collaboration with their teams and with their leadership. We also know that effective MTSS supports data-informed decisions. When we're looking at the needs of individual students, it really comes down to those conversations about the whole child. How can we best support each child? And, that ranges from how are we going to support students that might need more enrichment, all the way to how are we supporting students that have not yet mastered the foundational components of a specific area. So when we think about the elements of MTSS, what does strong MTSS really look like? Of course, we know the 3 tiers. We know that tier 1 is that whole class research-based core instruction. And we know that tier 1 should really be meeting the needs of about 80 to 85% of our students. And if we're not meeting that level of need in our tier 1, then that's a place for us to start, to go back and say, okay, what gaps might we see in tier 1 instruction? And we'll talk more about that as we get into this specific case study from the school that I've mentioned. Tier 2 is looking at that targeted small group interventions for at-risk students. Now notice here, this says at risk. We know we're still doing some small group in tier 1, providing that equitable access to grade level instruction. At tier 2, it becomes even more targeted. How am I supporting these students that are striving to gain ground? And then in tier 3, we know that this is our individualized intensive interventions, where tier 2 is focused on around 10% of our student population. Tier 2 should really, if our tier 1 is strong, tier 2 should be serving about 10% of our student population, whereas tier 3 is really serving those 3 to 5%, our most striving students, giving them the most individualized intensive interventions. What we also know is that it's not an either or. We know that if students are receiving Tier 3 instruction, they are also receiving very strong Tier 2 instruction during the day, and they are receiving that very rich Tier 1 instruction. They're not missing out on any of them. Why? Why does this all matter? Why is MTSS so important? Well, we've already talked about it some, but let's look at a little more. When we have that healthy MTSS system in place, we have systems and structures in place for addressing achievement and opportunity gaps. We also have systems and structures in place to help us serve diverse student populations effectively. And most states have some sort of requirement for an MTSS structure, something where we are really providing those rich instructional elements, be it the Tier 1 or the rich interventions. And MTSS promotes individualized access for all learners. Again, going back to that conversation, it doesn't matter if we're talking about our most striving readers. It doesn't matter if we're talking about um, students with IEPs, students that are learning English as an additional language, students that are identified as gifted and talented, or a combination of any of those scenarios. We're meeting the needs of every student. And how are we doing that? Well, it's that continuous cycle of shared leadership. So everyone is responsible for owning the data, for looking at the data, for making those informed decisions. Well, once we're looking at the data, what are we doing with it? We're collaborating, we're communicating, we're bringing in those evidence-based practices for high quality, high leverage instruction. Again, back to the data, we're making data-based decisions. We're problem solving based on not only individual student data, but on data trends that we see. We're talking about those layers of support. So Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, what are we doing to provide those layers? And then we're building that capacity and infrastructure, not only for our students, but for our teachers, and supporting at all levels the infrastructure of a healthy MTSS system. So how can CEC help with this? Well, Catalyst for Educational Change, CEC, one of the big elements on which we focus is MTSS. So how can we help support MTSS success? Number one, by customizing solutions. And we'll talk more about what that customization looks like in just a moment. The second thing is building the capacity of school teams, because we know if a system is going to be sustainable, whether that's MTSS or any other system, we have to build capacity within the teams. The third element is expert guidance. Maybe your team, your district, your school needs additional support or just a structure for assessment and data use. Maybe it's more along the lines of professional development. How do we come together as effective teams to plan for instruction? Maybe it's more about resource alignment. Okay, we have all of these resources. Let's determine what's going to work best at Tier 1, what elements could we put into Tier 2, and then that fourth one, continuous improvement. We know that things don't change overnight. And we know that the change research tells us for something to really, any change initiative to really have impact takes 3 to 5 years. And during that time, you have to be building that capacity. All right, so my apologies there. Outside the building, we have maintenance doing some work. My apologies. Um, One of the things that that we offer for MTSS is creating an MTSS handbook. And this sounds like something that is very basic, but it's very important work in which your team should invest. Here's why. It allows us the opportunity to examine current reality, to then build your MTSS structures based on that current reality, to plan for sustainability, and to think about what is needed, what action steps are needed to make each of these steps happen. Now, you'll see over on the right-hand side of the screen a snapshot of a needs assessment document. And this is a needs assessment document that we use when we first start conversations about your MTSS goals and vision. We use this to identify that current reality because it has all of the things that we need to consider for a strong MTSS structure, and it allows us to rate according to that rubric, where are we in that work? And it's something that, we support the team, the school team, the district team in doing this work collaboratively. So I want to share with you the results of this work from a school in Oklahoma this year. Now, this is a small rural district in Oklahoma, and the district came to us and said, we have MTSS, we're required by the state to have it. We have that, but we know it needs some work. We know that it's a little outdated. We know that systems are not in place for sustainability across all of our grade levels. Specifically, we know that our middle school and high school teams need more understanding when it comes to how does our MTSS plan work. So we began at the beginning of the 2024-2025 school year. We began with the needs assessment. So identifying our current reality. Once we had done that, we looked at the data that we had gathered there. We got teams together and got that qualitative data from focus group teams to say, hey, here are some of the things that we're seeing. And the focus groups involved input from staff members, students, families, and community members so that we got that well-rounded information. And then we came back with stage 4, the delivery of findings and recommendations. Now, here is what we determined as the starting points for this district. We realized that the protocols across pre-K through 12 just weren't solid. And so that was a key piece that we said we need to address, is really having that handbook that lays out for everyone, here are the elements of Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Here are the specific documents that we use when we're gathering our data. Here are the resources that we use so that, especially new teachers don't have to just go digging for things that they hope will work. Hey, here's a list of resources for things that we use in Tier 2 instruction. So that handbook becomes a living document. We also determined, based on looking at their state testing data, looking at their benchmark data, that English language arts was going to be the key focus for the year. And looking at the percentage of students that were achieving successfully at Tier 1, it was lower than that 80 to 85%, quite significantly lower. And so that was to be where we were going to focus. The other piece of it, as many, many districts are dealing with, was attendance. And we knew that focusing on Tier 1 instruction is not going to do the trick if we don't have them there. And so when we think about that social emotional learning piece, we know that attendance is a huge piece of that. So these were our 3 goals that we set for the year. During the course of the year, we created specific guidelines for all of the tiers of instruction. We mapped out what is the definition for each of the tiers of instruction, because we had some teachers who were asking, I don't know what the difference is between the tiers. And we actually broke it down into Tier 1, that whole group on grade level instruction, Tier 1 plus, which was individual or small group instruction, still centered around the grade level standards and curriculum, Tier 2, and Tier 3. We outlined these guidelines for academics, for behavior, and for social emotional learning. So teachers actually have in their handbook, here's what each of these elements are. Here are the district expectations that will happen within each of these elements. Here are data collection tools, and we linked those in within the handbook itself. So if we're gathering data on a student that we know we're going to need to bring them to the student support team to begin a conversation about Tier 2 or Tier 3 instruction, we know we need to come with data to those conversations. So if a student is struggling with behavior, here's the form that we use to collect some data on behavior trends that we're seeing for that student. If the student is struggling with attendance, then we have outlined what they will need to bring to the meeting, their attendance record, examples or samples of student work from when they are here, student grades, so that we can talk about the impact that attendance is having on student success. So it's a very clear-cut document. It's about 25 pages, but that was something that the district really needed. And so that was a year-long process that we worked to see, okay, what is the understanding currently? What is the current reality? Back to that needs assessment. What do we already have in place? What documents are you using? And what we found out was a variety of different things. So housing everything together so that teachers weren't having to just pull and hope that this was the right thing. They could go right to one resource. Another thing that we did was align resources for all of the tiers of instruction. For example, the teachers knew what their Tier 1 ELA instruction was. They were in year 2 of implementation on a new ELA curriculum. What they didn't know was what all was in that tier one resource. So we spent some time digging into what are in the online components of this curriculum. And we actually created an electronic document that listed at tier one, here are resources within our online curriculum that we can use and pull from. At tier two, they had things like supplemental phonics resources. So we linked those phonological awareness resources for our youngest grade levels. Um, Using instructional resources, whether it be iReady or IXL, linking those in so that teachers knew, okay, I can align um, these individualized instructional plans within these technology platforms to students for tier one instruction. So that document became very valuable to the teachers. And we heard over and over again, thank you so much, because it allowed me to go in and see, okay, if I have a kiddo doing this, that was the other thing we did with the resources, especially for behavior. We said, if you see a behavior such as X, Y, or Z, try this resource. Now we know one thing is not going to work for every single student, so we put in a variety. But that became an invaluable tool that teachers referred to routinely. The other thing that we did was put a focus on ongoing professional development for data analysis and data-informed instruction. Prior to beginning this work in the 24-25 school year, in the spring of 24, the district had implemented a new benchmark testing platform. And they had it up and rolling. The teachers had given the assessment to students in the spring, but they had no idea. And this was a huge conversation that came about from the focus groups. We have no idea how to read the reports that are generated from this benchmark system. We have no idea what the scores on these reports mean, and we don't know how to use this information to inform our instruction. So we used the district's early release days, they had 6 of them during the year, to really focus on analyzing that data, learning those data reports, and planning instruction based on that data. During the course of that time, we also did individualized coaching. And so teachers would have the opportunity to work with peers, to work with an on-site coach, to think about, okay, how can I align what I'm seeing here in the data with my current instruction? So it wasn't just attend this PD and then good luck. It was that ongoing job embedded professional learning where the teachers could come back and say, hey, I need support with this area. The final piece, so that we made sure we have ownership from everyone with the handbook, was at the end of this year. So just within the last 4 weeks, the creation of this new MTSS handbook had gone on all year with input from not only the district and school leadership teams, but from the teacher leadership teams. So the leaders of each PLC group had been involved in that as well. Then at the last early release day of the semester, we put this in front of them as an entire school and asked for their input. So PLCs met, they were into the document, adding edits, asking questions so that this document truly is their own. So that was the work that we did during this 2024-2025 school year. And we're still a work in progress. As I said, when you think about any change initiative, 3 to 5 years before you see huge returns on your investment. But I do want to share some of the returns that we have seen just after this first year. So these are some of our celebrations. District-wide, we just finished giving our end of year results from our benchmark assessment. And what we found for ELA is district-wide, we were in the 63rd percentile for growth. Now we give this district gives the NWEA MAP assessment. And so what that told us, this district grew at a higher rate than average, with average being that, depending on which information you look at, that 40th to 50th, but I base mine on the 50th percentile. So huge growth there. Some of our highlights, our second grade team, their growth was in the 85th percentile. You can see from there, 8th grade and 10th grade both had growth of 67th percentile. Our 11th grade was at the 52nd percentile, and our first grade was at the 51st. So all above that national average. We also had a huge gain on students taking the ACT as far as their composite score. The average composite score, we grew 2 points. So very exciting results. We know we still have a lot of work to do within the district, but this was very encouraging to help us see we're on the right path. Now, as we think about next steps and prepare for the 25-26 school year in the district, these are the elements that the district has identified as summer work. And again, the leadership teams, including the teacher leadership cadre, has already started planning and has said, we want to come together to do this work of identifying the focus standards at each grade level for ELA. And we want to align our curriculum to that. So as we think about those 12 to 13 focus standards at each grade level, do we see that our curriculum is really in line with those standards? Or do we see that there are some gaps that we need to address? Once they have done that, the next step in that plan is to create vertically aligned ELA pacing guides across all grade levels. So we now have the common data, we have the focus standards, we've identified the needs of the curriculum. Now we can say, in order for these standards to flow and for students to meet them across the grade levels, here is what we commit to doing at each grade level. Again, this was at the request of the district and the request of the teachers based on what we had done during year one and based on our analysis of our first year's data. The third thing, the team said, yes, we experienced a lot of growth, but we know that we still are not where we need to be as far as 80 to 85% of our students achieving at grade level. And so we want to have conversations about how can we enhance our Tier 1 ELA instruction. So they're wanting to go back in and do some additional professional learning on high leverage instructional strategies, on student discourse and student engagement. And so these are the three key steps that they have identified for planning for the 2025-2026 school year. So when we think about this work, that all came from 1 year of partnering with Catalyst for Educational Change. So when you think about why that partnership, here are a few things that we can provide along the way. Mission aligned. So thinking about your district's mission and vision, thinking about the mission and vision of CEC to support equity, access, and sustainability across the district. CEC has a proven track record supporting schools that are both public and charter. And just as you can see from the data shared for this school district, going back and looking at additional data collected on the school districts that we support, building that proven track record. Expertise in key areas. We have a team of individuals dedicated to supporting school improvement and student outcomes. This team has a wide variety of experience areas, and when we work with schools, we match people with the expertise areas that they have with the needs of the schools. Data-driven strategies. As you saw, we have the MTSS handbook that we use to guide the MTSS process based on evidence-based strategies to support the work that we do within the district. Now, even though we have that to support the work, all solutions are still tailored. That's why we begin with that needs assessment to say exactly what does your district need. So you can see as you look over here at the graphic, the logic model, we begin with the agreements. What do we want? What are we looking for to support in our school? What is the alignment? What are the diagnostics? So bringing all of those together through that needs assessment, identifying where it is the district really has vision for going. It's a collaborative and empowering approach. The purpose of work within schools is to make schools independent in that work, to build that capacity so that the school teams are the ones who can sustain and move forward with the initiative as we step back and gradually release more and more responsibility to the school teams, because the whole goal is to build that capacity. Now, a key element of Catalyst for Educational Change is being that nonprofit. We are focused on purpose over profit. The core of CEC is, as you can see, the building the capacity, the supporting the team, building the processes over time. Long-term sustainability is at the heart of everything that we do. We want, when we step out of a building for the last time, to be able to say to that building, you have this. You have what it takes to continue this work that you've worked so hard to build. And your success is why we do what we do. We work with you. Everything is tailored to meet the needs of your district, of your teams. And all along the way, we keep in mind, where are we? What are our short-term goals? How do we meet those? What are our midterm goals? How did we meet those? What are our long-term objectives? So we're continuously checking in to ensure that the work that we're doing is at the heart of the vision created by the district and our teams. So I'm going to ask you to pause for a moment and reflect. We've talked a lot, I've talked a lot about the purpose of MTSS, how we can support it putting those structures in place, and the success that we've had in this work that we're doing with our school in Oklahoma. Just one of many, many examples. So I'm going to ask you now to reflect on, what is one practical challenge you're currently facing in the consistent implementation of MTSS? So this can be across your district, it can be across your school, it can be within a specific team. Just pause for a moment, reflect on your situation, and then I'll come back in just a moment and share out. Starting to see some things come in here in chat. So I just want to pause for a few more moments. Okay, I'm starting to see some things come in, and I'm going to group these a little bit because I'm seeing some similar conversations come up. One of the things that I've seen mentioned multiple times is we don't currently have an interventionist, because of budget cuts, because of staff size, a variety of different things. That's an issue that a lot of districts are facing. We're thinking about ELA, but we don't have a reading specialist. We don't have someone to provide that tier 2 and tier 3 pullout. What do we do? Here's the best answer I can give to you. There's not one right answer. But in partnering with your school, we can tackle that challenge together. We can talk about, okay, is there a way that we could perhaps create a walk to learn block of 30 minutes for tier 2? Is there someone in the building with reading specialist background that we could release from a couple of hours of courses to be able to pull those small groups of students or those individual students for tier 2 and tier 3? So it's really going to be dependent upon availability of resources in your building and looking at how can we creatively um, utilize the resources that are there. So that's one of the things that we do during that needs assessment time as we identify what are some of these gaps and challenges. Another one that I'm seeing, and I've seen it mentioned multiple times here, is small group instruction is not happening during tier 1. My teachers tend to think of small group as a tier 2 thing. How do I change that? Again, each situation is going to be different. A lot of times, what I find though is it's a mindset that maybe there needs to be a perspective shift in how we can do some small group instruction. Maybe it's that we need a bit more understanding of what differentiation can look like. Um, again, lots of different ways that we can address that challenge based on the needs, based on the specifics of your building. All right. I know we are getting close to the end of our time, and I know everyone is very busy and it's going to be dismissal time for a lot of you very soon. So I want to start to pull everything together and wrap up. A few things as we wrap up. I want to encourage you to think about your MTSS system and think about the students on your campus, the students in your district, because here's what we know. Every student deserves the right support. CEC is here to help with that, to help you build those sustainable systems that will be in place to support many, many students coming through your doors for many, many years. So I invite you to reach out. Let's talk about how we could partner for lasting positive change in your school. I also want to invite you, here on the screen, you'll see there's a QR code. On August 5th and 6th in Chicago, and information is there in the QR code as far as specifics about location. We are going to be hosting the MTSS Summer Institute. We would love to have you join us, and it will be August 5th and 6th. Again, all of the registration information is included in the QR code. And finally, I just want to share a few resources with you. We would love to connect with you. I would love to connect with you to answer any questions that you might have, to talk about next steps. My email is listed up here at the top. The QR code, you can scan that and it will take you right to our updated service catalog. So you can see all of the different offerings that we have available, ways in which we can support you, always knowing that each of those will be individualized to really meet the needs of your school and your district. So with that said, I want to thank you all for joining. It's been a pleasure to have you here. I wish you the very best as you wrap up your school year, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. So again, please don't hesitate to reach out if we can be a support in any way. Have a great